Alexa. I am the host of the Clinicians Atelier, and today we have a guest. I'm very excited, Dr. Matthew Mintz. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this podcast and sharing your experience with marketing and how you grew your practice. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and share anything else with our guests today.
Sure. No, happy to be here. So I'll give you a brief background. So my name is Matthew Mintz. I'm an internal medicine and primary care physician. I've been in practice for 27 years. The first 20 years of that was at an academic institution. So I was full-time faculty, split my time between teaching and seeing patients, and left to start my own concierge practice about 7 years ago. And it's a DPC concierge practice, meaning I market the practice as a concierge practice, but the business model that I use is direct primary care. In addition to that, there's a number of other services that I've sort of added along the way. So I have almost a hybrid practice, in the sense of that I do primary care, but I also do other things. So I do medical cannabis certifications, I do medical weight loss, and I do ketamine-based treatments for depression. And then I just started moving toward integrative and functional medicine. And so right now I'm doing long COVID treatments. I'm doing longevity and anti-aging medicine, but we'll likely expand those services to do more, general functional integrative medicine. And so my practice continues to evolve, even though I started my own practice about 7 years ago. I'm in Rockville, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C.
You market yourself as concierge, but you actually have a DPC model. Can you tell me what made you market yourself as a concierge versus marketing as DPC?
So there's DPC, the business model, and there's sort of DPC, the movement or the philosophy. And the two are obviously intertwined, but basically from a business standpoint, the idea behind DPC is no insurance, low overhead membership model. And that's how it works. If you get rid of the third party payer, you can offer sort of a high quality, low cost, affordable service. And if you just keep your overhead down, it works really nicely. So that's sort of the DPC business model. The DPC philosophy is a little bit broader. It's sort of anti-concierge. It's like, it's the solution to healthcare for some, that basically insurance has ruined healthcare. If we have direct memberships, if we get, if we get insurance out of the way, we can offer high quality but also affordable care that most people can afford. And in fact, DPC doctors can save you money because they can contract with the labs and give you low cost labs, or they can buy, medications wholesale and sell it to you for very little margin up. And so you can actually, especially if you have, as many people do, these high deductible plans where you're going to have to pay out of pocket anyway, DPC will save you money. So obviously the two are intertwined, but there's a little bit difference between the business model. The DPC, the problem with DPC, not the problem, but a challenge for DPC, you especially using that sort of DPC philosophy, is that there's an educational curve. Okay. How are you, if I already am paying for insurance, how are you going to save me money? That's a high bar because it's a new term. No one really knows what it is. Okay. So the reason why I decided to market myself as concierge is because, as I mentioned, I'm in Rockville, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. So I'm in Montgomery County, which is one of the wealthiest suburbs in the country. While not all the doctors are concierge has been, a significant portion, more higher than the national average. So if the national average of concierge docs is 2 or 3%, in my area, it's like 10%. So concierge was already well known in my area. In addition to that, most of the concierge doctors in my area had been doing it for 15 plus years. And so, some of them were on the verge of retirement, and many of them were not even accepting new patients. So the market was very ripe for a new concierge doctor. So, having started a practice sort of, late in my career, again, I'd been practicing for 20 years in academics, thought I would stay there forever, didn't think that I was going to start my own practice. I wanted to be up and running relatively quickly. And in the area that I was in, it just made sense to call myself a concierge doctor. And then if they ever ask me, well, how are you different from NDVIP and some of these other sort of what I call corporate concierge practices, I would explain it to them. It got rid of that educational barrier, and then it also helped me, from an SEO standpoint, because if you don't know what direct primary care is, you're not going to Google direct primary care doctor. If you're looking for a concierge doctor in my area, you're going to Google that. So it was also easier for people to find me. So it just made, because of where I was in my career and what I wanted to do, and primarily my location, it sort of made sense for me to just market it as concierge.
That's good. And I think that's a great point. And I kind of wanted to kind of point it out to the listeners is know your market, right? You said your market already had been established. It was probably a higher average than the other parts of the United States. And so one, know your market. Number two, the key terms, people were already familiar with those key terms. And so they were probably already searching for that. So I think that's another big thing to point out is because you did your research and because you knew that, it probably helped you be more searchable when people were looking for services. So I definitely wanted to kind of reiterate that for people that didn't quite pick up on it.
No, and that's so important. And so in some ways, my area is an outlier. Like not everyone is going to be, who's interested in DPC is going to be in a suburb of a major city. But the concept of knowing your market is extremely applicable. And it's not like, so I present it sort of two scenarios, but it's not black and white like that. So you want to know things like, so by knowing your market, what does that mean? It means how many practices are in your area? Are they insurance-based? Are they concierge? Are they DPC? Are they full? Okay. So that would be like one thing to know. What's the income in the area? What's the housing cost in your area? How does that compare to the national average? So for example, one of the things, I've advised, people who work with who I help. One of the other things that I like to do is I like to help doctors start practices. One of the things that I've mentioned to people who may not be as in high of a cost living area, but not necessarily where, trying to save the money is an easier sell. I've told them to market as an alternative to concierge. So, this is what their brand is, and this is the concierge for everyone. Because again, it may be that their area concierge may not be as prevalent as where it is where I am, but there's a couple concierge practices already there, and they can use that to their advantage. So they can have a DPC, and they try to be the best of both worlds. In other words, high quality, reasonable cost, but use the term concierge if it's known in the area in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about something when we talked offline that you mentioned before you opened your practice, you considered purchasing a practice first. So can you tell me a little bit, one, you thought about purchasing a practice, what made you choose not to and start your own?
Okay, so good question. So again, I was in academics. I left for a number of reasons, but the primary reason was salary. I was in internal medicine, practicing for over 20 years. I had a concierge practice at the medical school, which is pretty unique. And the last 4 years I was there, I was in the dean's office. So I was a concierge doctor in a high cost of living area, dean in a medical school, and I was still making less than the average family physician across the country. So that math did not add up. And I probably stayed at a job I loved, way too long just because I loved the job. But at some point, it just became untenable to stay there. So I had been thinking about leaving, and I was in the process of negotiating a higher contract to see if I could stay. And the academic year in medicine is July to July. That's when all the new resident starts and stuff like that. So this was now, I was in the process in the spring working with my boss, the dean of the medical school, to try to get a higher salary. And late March, I was approached by two concierge doctors who wanted to retire and sell their practice. They wanted to offload their practice. So they had heard about me through other means and approached me, hey, do you want to buy our practice? So I talked to them. It looked like it was, this was something that was going to be viable. So I went back to my boss and I said, look, these doctors want me to buy their practice. I would like to stay here. Here's how much it will cost you for me to stay here. And they basically said no. I was very upset, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I decided I was going to buy these doctors' practice. And I worked with them for like a month. And I was so convinced that this was going to work out that I gave my 90 days notice. But after working with them for about a month, it was very clear that they were just asking for too much money. And they had hired, a practice, consultant that told them that their practice was worth $750,000. And the market changes all the time. And basically no one's buying practices, period, and no one's coming into the area, and the market was already ripe for a new concierge doctor. So, they were going to offer it to me for less, thinking that they were getting a deal. And I'm like, for what for what you want me to pay for this, I could start my own practice. So at the end of the day, we couldn't come to an agreement. And I decided, you know what, I'll just start my own practice. And that's what I could. And I had already given my 90 days notice. So I basically had 2 months to start a practice while still working at my own job. So I had to get up and running pretty quickly, but fortunately it worked out.
First got started, what would you say was your first strategy? How did you begin to bring in patients?
Basically, all and everything is what I would say. It's DPC doctors usually all start from scratch. Not all of them, but many of them will start from scratch. It's very rare for a concierge doctor to start from scratch because most concierge doctors convert. So they had this, large insurance-based panel, and they work with a company who sends out a letter, and as long as 10% of their, panel like converts, they have enough to start a practice. So while I was in the area, I was far enough away from downtown, and I already had a small concierge practice to begin with. I wasn't bringing in any established patients, so I only had a few people that would able to follow me. So I was basically starting from scratch. So again, they don't teach you this kind of stuff in medical school, so you have to learn pretty quickly. So I did everything I could to get my name out there. Number one, so I joined the Chamber of Commerce, which the local Chamber of Commerce, was just very helpful. Through that, I started joining other networking groups and started to network with the business community. I started doing talks in the area. I started telling everyone and anyone I could that I was starting a practice. I got a website out there, put that online. What are the things I did various different type of things. Like I even sponsored a 5K, not the whole thing, but, had a table there to get to know the community. So it's basically trying to get out in the community, to the business community, the public, tell people what you're doing, and make sure they know how to find you. And that's sort of, and have a good website. And that was sort of the first things that I started to do. Now, again, it didn't happen overnight, which is why I started adding other services. But that I think was eventually quite helpful, just sort of getting out there. And, you can build a website, but if you don't, and it's important to do. But that's not the only way. You really have to get your name out there. I sent a letter to every specialist within a 5-mile radius, letting them know that I was there. I visited over 50 specialists in the area, door to door, knocking on their door just to say hi. I'm in the area. I did that. So I did pretty much. Some things worked, some things didn't. And the problem is you never know what's going to hit and what's not. That's one of the problems with marketing also in advertising, is like you don't know exactly what's going to hit, what's not going to hit. So you try everything and and then you also evaluate like what's working, what's not working. So for example, one thing I did early on was like a print ad. That was a big failure and it cost a lot of money. So I said, I'm not going to do that again. So, it's not all going to work perfectly, and you have to understand that you're going to make mistakes. And as long as you learn from that, they're not mistakes.
Yeah. No, I love that you said that, which just validates everything I've ever told people that are starting in a community. Obviously, telemedicine's a different animal, so to speak. But I worked in real estate. I actually own a real estate brokerage as well in Houston. And so a lot of the things I teach in sales and marketing is from local real estate because it still translates very well when you're starting a business locally. And those are things that I say, like, go to networking events, go out and meet people, like all the things that you're sharing. Actually, the specialist, that's another thing that I think is a great thing that you shared, because obviously that's something I have never shared. So I'm like, that's a great idea. Did you feel like going with specialists did bring you any types of referrals? Did that work well?
Not interestingly enough, not as many as I had hoped. So it wasn't completely a waste of time, but that was not where the majority of my new patients came from. Going back to the networking, another thing that you brought up that made me think about it is, so again, because when I went to doing some of these networking things, there were other people like real estate agents there. And one of the things about some networking activities, and it depends on your location and what you do, like BNI is like a national one. One of the things that's good about these things, other than meeting other people, is some of these groups spend time teaching you skills about how to network, about how to market. So again, like I said, they don't teach you this in medical school. So a perfect example, so I never joined BNI, but I was invited to a lot of BNI meetings. So one of the things you learn, I mean, this was an invaluable skill, is how do you do your elevator pitch? Like, you have to know how to do your elevator pitch. Like, I had never heard of what's an elevator pitch. But if you don't know how to do that, whether it's to the business community or a potential patient, so some things, there's no different in real estate than it is in medicine, because ultimately you're selling a product or selling a service. We as physicians don't like to think of ourselves as salespeople. We're not selling anything. We're a doctor. We're giving care. But at the end of the day, when you have to, it's a business. And so it's, when you're working at an institution like, an academic center like I was, or even if you're in a large private practice, you might not be the one that's doing the marketing or doing the sales, but someone is, right? So because it's your own business, now you have it's part of the thing, and you better get really comfortable with it really quickly, or you're not going to be successful. So by sort of throwing myself out there to do, with no experience in any of this stuff, I'm just like, let me just try it. It was a really good idea because I learned skills that I really needed. That was probably, half the value of the networking was learning some of those skills, and how do you make connections, and how do you follow up, and how do you do one-on-ones, like how do you do all that stuff was very, very valuable.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually wonderful that you shared that. I wouldn't have even thought about that. I guess because I have a sales background already, I wouldn't have thought how that could be so valuable to someone that does not have those skills.
Yeah, well, it's not even a skill. It's doctors hate the concept of money, and they hate the concept of sale. It's because the sort of the profession sort of always sort of assumed that you would get compensated if you were a good doctor, you would be justly compensated. And for some specialties, that's the case still. But for many specialties, more and more, that's just not the same thing, and people are leaving. So the idea of money is like icky to us in medicine, because we don't want money to be a barrier. We want to treat the patient and give them whatever they need to get them better. And we don't think about cost, because cost in medicine is the doctor has no interface with the cost in general in an insurance-based system. Patient comes in, they may pay the copay, the doctor sees them, they click a couple buttons, they don't know how much things cost. They have no idea. And for the most part, because most doctors are employed, they don't know even how much they get. They don't know how much they're charging and how much they're getting, because they just get a paycheck from their boss. And they're happy, and they don't have to worry about the money, because money is icky to us. We don't like, but unfortunately, when you start a practice, you're starting a business. So you have to get really comfortable with the money thing.
That's actually like a really good, I never thought of it that way. And that's like a good psychology. And even for myself, that helps start practices. I think that's a good thing for me to even keep in mind, of the mentality of where maybe the doctors or the clinicians are coming from. The other thing I was going to say, and what I tell people with sales, because I also, even though I worked in sales, I never thought of myself as a salesperson. I've always thought of myself as an educator, because I love explaining and sharing and teaching. So if I see an issue, or I see like a problem, so to speak, it's like, how can I solve this? How can I help you? Right. So when you mention, doctors are like, I just want to help you, think of it like, how can I help you? Like, sharing like, this is what I'm bringing to the community. This is the problem I'm solving. You don't have insurance. I'm here to solve that problem. Right. And so when you go to these networking events, and I always tell people, real estate agents, we're 1099. Like, we don't have insurance. A lot of us are, creatives. Like, I have run two businesses. So it's like, I don't have insurance because it costs like $500, $600 a month for one person. I'm not going to pay it. Like, I'd rather go pay my DPC doctor, $100, $150, $200 a month, whatever the fee is, and know that I can call them whenever I need. And I would rather pay that than to pay, insurance and then a copay on top of that, and not even get more than 7 minutes with my physician. But that's just speaking also because I've been a DPC patient, but that's what made me love this model and why I love working with DPC docs. But I do love all the information that you share, because those are things that I haven't even thought of at times, because again, I come from a different perspective and I continue to learn all the time. Like, I never knew why doctors spent 7 minutes with patients in the past until until I learned how the insurance model worked in the first place. So when you realize that when you kind of own your time as a DPC doctor or a cash pay model, and you're not being restricted by the insurance, you can actually give your patients the care that they deserve, and the care that you guys want to actually give us, that we didn't know you wanted to give us, right? Because we didn't know. No, so that's good. So you mentioned that you got a website. Did you hire someone to do your website? And tell me a little bit about that.
All right. So initially, no, I did not initially hire someone to do my website. So because of my educational background, I had an interest in technology as it can help education. So because of that, I had a little bit of skills in tech. I mean, not dramatic, but enough that I could go to Wix and put up my own website. So I did, I did that. I've actually, interestingly, part of that got me sort of the interest of education and technology. Because of that, a long time ago, I had started a blog, just for fun, because I thought that would be something that we could use with students. And I ended up using it more for patient education. But I bought a URL, so I already had the URL already. So starting it, I had a blog already. So it wasn't a big leap to put up a website. So I basically went to Wix, created a website, had a couple family members and friends double check it for grammar and stuff like that, and just put that up. Now, later on, one of the things that like I said, it took a while for me to get up and running. And one of the challenges that I had is because I started so late in my career, finances were, a big issue. I had two daughters in high school who were both about to go to college. And I didn't have the luxury of living lean and things like that. Like, I had to be profitable relatively quickly so I could send my kids to college. So I ended up doing a couple different things. One of the first things that I did was I dipped my toe into aesthetics. That's another way where I got some education in marketing and branding and things like that. Because when you do that, the aesthetics folks want you to be successful, so you get a lot of freebies. And one of the freebies I got was a professional website for a year. And they had built-in SEO and things like that. And I got such good response from that, I decided, even though I eventually ended up getting out of aesthetics, I decided to keep that website for a number of years. I've recently switched because I found something that was a little bit less expensive, but it also showed me the value of SEO and the value of having a website. Sometimes, if you have to spend your money on something, depending on your practice and your market and your brand and stuff like that, sometimes SEO is much better. Like in my case, people were already looking for a concierge doc. Someone's marketing or branding themselves as a DPC, the boots on the ground marketing and even advertising in a smart way may be more value than spending money on the SEO. So it really depends, again, what your market, your market, use that market to come up with your brand and and how you're going to market yourself. And then you can decide how to do it. But for me, because I had sort of already paid for the SEO and saw the value of it, decided to continue to pay for that.
Yeah, there's something I always tell people. A website without a strategy is useless. It doesn't matter if that strategy is, you going boots on the ground, going in person, handing out cards because you're driving traffic that way, whether it's an SEO, whether it's Google Ads, whether it's social media. It doesn't matter as long as you have a strategy that works for your target, right? So that's something really important. I still am a big believer. And again, it goes back to just my sales experience in local sales. When I've gone sometimes from 0 leads to 40 leads within 30 days, just going out and talking to people and going to networking events because there's people there, business people. You're also a small business. They're small businesses. They're a perfect target audience for, these cash pay models. And it also, again, it depends what your niche is. So that may not work for everybody. But again, knowing exactly who you're selling to and going to find them. For me, since I sell a lot to DPC, going to the DPC events, like that's where I meet my target audience and spending my, saving my money every year to go to those events because I can do stuff online and people do see me. But when I go in person, I know that's where the relationship is solidified versus me spending money for online ads. I did that. It didn't work for me. Like I, spent money for almost 2 years and I didn't really get any leads. Like people called me, nothing converted. But when I go to those in person, they convert. So you just have to know where to find your target.
Right. And so, and it's also, it depends on what those ads are doing. So it's not that it's not that ads don't work. It's like you have to be very sort of figure out sort of what's going to work for you in based on what your plan is, because not every method works for every plan.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said, I'm not saying ads don't work. They definitely work for some, but that's what I'm saying, a strategy.
Yeah, you have to strategy. Exactly. You have to have a strategy, and all of these things can be part of your strategy. But just saying, well, I'm going to do Google ads or I'm going to do SEO, if you don't have a strategy, is not going to help you. It's probably going to backfire.
Another thing I want to bring up, and I don't think we really talked about this yet, and something that I mentioned earlier that I found very unique that you did that I was curious about was that you had reached out to retiring doctors. A, how did you know they were retiring? And two, how did you have those conversations?
Yeah, going back to knowing your market, I did just a lay of the land. What's the opportunity? If I decided to leave academics, what's the opportunity for me to start a practice? Like, what would I look like? Not even thinking DPC or concierge or whatever, just what's out there. So I did in my free time, did a pretty deep dive in sort of the lay of the land of my area. What were the practices? What did they look like? Were they full? Like, was there room? Could I join someone? All that stuff. And so because I did that, I learned that there was a huge opportunity. And this was even 10 years before I left, that there were a bunch of concierge practices. These doctors were, in it, had been there for a little while. They were probably going to retire at some point soon, and that there was probably opportunity for me to start my own practice. So I decided to start my own practice. I had to get up and running pretty quickly. So when I was looking for space, I got very lucky, and there was a space in the building that they were already in. The same building that these doctors who I was going to buy the practice from. And so I actually ended up getting a few of those patients for free just because it was in the same building. But I sort of by then knew, okay, well, if these doctors are retiring, and when I looked before that, I need to look. And so I basically started calling up and finding out like which doctors are retiring or about to retire, and would they be interested in sending me their patients and things like that. And and so I was fortunate enough to connect with a number of different doctors that I was able to get patients from to help build a practice.
So you just kind of called around and asked if they were retiring soon, and then you just said, I'd be happy to take on any referrals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you're retiring, let me know. If they needed patients for their patients to go, hopefully they would keep me in mind.
That's so good. I really like that. I think really the theme I'm finding here, outside of obviously SEO is more online, but go out, meet people, go and do the calls, do the sales, do the work, and there's no reason why your practice can't grow. I think what happens is people get intimidated, or they get anxious, or they're afraid to make those calls, or they're afraid to get out there. And then I talk to people. Sometimes I do coaching one-on-one and people will call me for ideas, like, how can I do this? Or what do you recommend? And I always tell them networking. Like, it's like, to me, it's common sense. It's like, go network, like that's one of the free things you can do. I mean, not every networking is free, but there are a lot of free networking events. All you have to do is go to like eventbrite.com or meetup.com, type in your city. If you're in a major city, it's easier. It's a little harder in rural towns, but if you're in a major city, it's pretty easy to find like small business.
But I will tell you though, and again, maybe this was just because I was in academics for 20 years. Like I knew what the term networking meant, but this concept of networking was completely foreign to me. The way I sort of was introduced to this is that my sister, who also lives in the area, started her own business, not a medical business, completely different. And she was very involved in the local chamber. And she basically said, look, you're starting a business in this area. You need to be involved in the chamber. And I listened to her and I got involved. And through that, I learned about like, what does that mean? What does even the Chamber of Commerce do? Like, I didn't know that, and so I didn't, and this is like a whole new sort of small business world that I had no idea existed and got sort of a crash course. And it was great. It really helped a lot. So, so yes, you're right. It's absolutely, it should be, it's free. It's like the easiest possible thing that you can do. It's fun. It's almost too fun. Like you feel like, wait, this isn't work. This is like, is this really, you get free food. So yeah, it should be obvious. But if you've basically been in the books studying biochemistry, since high school with the goal of being a doctor, like, unless you have friends that are real estate agents and invite you to a thing, like you don't know about this. I had no idea.
I feel like all real estate agents, all they do is have fun. But the reason I say it seems like common sense is what I tell people, and this could be the same in your profession, right? What seems like common sense to you is often not common sense to somebody else. And that was kind of the point of the comment is like, what's like, hey, go to networking. But like you're saying that wasn't something you were, like you said, you study your whole life to be a doctor, you work in medicine, you're not out there mingling, getting to know people. And so thinking, oh, I'm going to go to a networking event isn't really the first thing that comes to mind when you're starting a business. So I understand. Looking back, what marketing strategy or decision would you say was the biggest impact to grow your business?
I probably sticking with the website, paying for the commercial website that had a good SEO. That was one. I think making the decision early on that I was going to market as a concierge practice, sort of knowing the area. That was another one. As we already mentioned, going out to other concierge docs helped me build. So those, I think, were the top three things that sort of helped me build and grow.
Okay, awesome. And then my last question would be for practices just starting out, what advice would you give them regarding marketing and patient acquisitions?
All right, so this is a good one. So I thought the next question was going to be, what was the worst decision that you made?
Well, I mean, if you have advice, throw that one in there.
Well, it ties into your second question, and so I definitely think while it ultimately I didn't lose a lot of money. Going into aesthetics was probably was not a good decision. Was probably the worst decision that I made. Ultimately, I didn't lose too much, but the reason I decided to do that is because I was nervous. I was basically I have two teenage daughters, a house, a mortgage. I need to have some income. What am I going to do to get that income coming in? Because I got and so I decided to do something that really I didn't want to do, and so you really have to trust your gut, and I probably didn't trust my gut. So to answer your question is, I think the advice that I give people that I work with, and as I mentioned, in addition to having a practice, one of the things that I do is I do some consulting work for doctors that are starting practices. And the first thing I tell them is that you have to have a vision for your practice. Like, yes, you're going to stress over, do I get a website? Do I spend? What's my brand? All that stuff are these, it's almost like there's so many decisions that can be overwhelming. But to clarify and help you make those decisions is what your vision is, so you have to sort of start there. So like I said, like one of the things I say is like, forget about the money, forget about whether you can do it, whether people, just assume that you have like the perfect practice. Okay. 3 years from now, what does that look like? Like, what are you doing? What are the patients that you're seeing? What does your day look like? Like, when do you start? When do you end? What kind of patients are you seeing? Like, what is that vision for your practice? Because once you have that vision and you sort of know where you're going at, then you can sort of work backwards with branding, with strategy, and then, like we said before, like, don't do any of these things without a strategy. So you have your vision, and then you work backwards to develop a strategy to slowly build that vision. And then that basically informs all your decisions, from your marketing, your branding, your website, your practice name, all that stuff starts with that future vision, as opposed to, how am I going to make some money? How am I going to get patients in the door? That's not the best way to do it. You'll be much happier and more successful faster by starting with a vision.
I like that. I the way I saw it in my mind is like, when you have that goal, right? That vision, the goal, and then you make the actionable items, right? What steps I need to take. I always laugh at this. I heard this years ago, and I like saying it. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And so sometimes that elephant seems like, how am I ever going to accomplish all of this? And we overwhelmed with every task we think we need to do, but it's just one step at a time. And so I like the way you said that, like, what is the vision? I've always said my slogan for my branding agency is translating visions, because when people talk to me, it's like I have a way of seeing like what they're telling me.
Right. And that's really good, because your brand is your translation of your vision. That's exactly right. So you might have this vision of what your practice looks like and what it should be, but you may not know how to communicate that or how to market that. And that's when you get, experts like yourself to help you with that. And people can also help, but you sort of should know what your vision. So, and the other thing too is, while you can like take a stepwise approach, often when building a practice, it's not always linear. So, but if you know if you know what your vision is, it can help guide you. You have to think of, what is that vision? What's that practice look like? Not just, I want to do family medicine and use a DPC model. That's a business model. It's like, what kind of doctor, what kind of patients, what's the feeling? Vision is about feeling. Like, what are the patients going to feel when they come and work with you? Or like, that's the kind of, and then that's sort of where, your expertise in branding. How do you take that? I'll just throw something out there. I want to help adult to middle-aged female patients be their best selves in a healthy way. That might be someone's vision, right? And that could mean a whole lot of things. But if you have that vision, it gives you someplace to start. And I'm sure just based on that, you could come up with a clever brand that I probably couldn't come up with.
Well, that's so good. I thank you so much for your time. This was honestly super helpful, and I'm really excited to share this with everybody. And I hope people find a lot of value. I found a lot of value myself. I love learning, and I even got some good ideas. And I'm not even the one opening the practices, but to give my clients ideas that I speak to as well. So thank you for your time, and thank you for everything.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm always looking to interview clinicians that have direct pay, cash pay concierge practices, private pay practices. The reason is because oftentimes I have worked directly with private practices that are in these models, and marketing has always been a little scary, or sometimes not really knowing how to grow your practice can be challenging. So that's why the Clinician Atelier was born. It wasn't just born for do-it-yourself clinicians that wanted to build their brand, but it was also designed to give ideas and tips on how to grow your practice and market your practice. So I created this podcast to really be able to interview people that wanted to share their stories on how they were able to grow their practice to either their full panel or to a place where they felt very comfortable to practice medicine their way, or run their practice or their therapy practice their way. So if you have a story you'd like to share, you can visit our website at theclinicianatelier.com, or you can also message me privately on social media or email us. and tell us your story so that you can be featured and help others that may be starting or may have started and just need a little bit of guidance on how they can also be successful.